Rangers fans, welcome to Liberty Blue, the essential New York Rangers podcast. I'm Andrew Chelney, alongside Nick Zararis. And Nick, game one between the Rangers and the Carolina Hurricanes is Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern. And to preview that series, we have a special guest joining the show today. He covers the Hurricanes for North States Journal and also for The Athletic. Does an incredible job. Friend of the show, it's Cory Lavalette. Cory, what's up, man? Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I noticed you got the Brady Shay jersey hanging back there, so we're ready to roll.
Hey, there was a moment in time where Brady Shay was the most optimistic prospect the Rangers had, where he was genuinely the only beacon of light on a really bad Rangers team.
Trust me, here in Carolina, we went through a long stretch where every season ended with us asking who was going to the World Championship. So I understand the struggle of waiting for a team to reach the postseason.
So let's start here, Cory. You know, the Hurricanes, I don't want to say breeze through the Islanders because it was a tough series. It was maybe closer than a lot of people would figure that it would be. Couple of blown leads goes the Hurricanes' way, and then they win in 5. Take me through, because you were there. You talked to players before and after and coaches. Take me through the thought process from game 1 to game 5, and just kind of the thought process of, this is a team that we should beat. We did beat in 5, but maybe it was closer than we gave them credit for.
Yeah, I don't feel like the Hurricanes played particularly well in the Islanders series. A lot of that has to do with the Islanders, and I mean, you all are familiar with them. They're not the most talented team in the NHL, but they do have a way, especially in a series when they can really kind of, dig their hooks in you to really kind of muck things up. And they, there's enough skill guys there. The Matthew Barzals and the Brock Nelsons, the Bo Horvats to, get them enough scoring to make things interesting. But I predicted beforehand a gentleman's sweep, and that's where we ended up. I think the big thing was the Hurricanes power play has continued to be good. It's been a problem for a few years now. It's always been kind of middle of the pack. I wouldn't say it's been terrible, but obviously this year it was really, really good. And some of the additions they made give it the potential to be even better. So, yeah, it was a kind of a weird series. I felt like maybe Freddy Anderson's play got overhyped a little bit because of a couple saves he made. He was fine. I don't think he was bad by any means. But he was okay. He kind of did the Freddy Anderson thing, which is, he's pretty straight line, solid player with the exception of him, falling over in game 5. He was pretty good. So yeah, it was a weird series, but I think we've kind of become accustomed to these with the Islanders. Last year was pretty similar. And really the only time it looked like Hurricanes hockey was that comeback in game 2.
Building off of that, you had mentioned the power play being better this year. What would you attribute that bump in power play success to? Is it personnel? Is it just maybe it's a year thing where every now and then you just get the bounces?
Yeah, no, I think they just kind of figured some things out. I mean, getting Andrei Svechnikov back obviously is huge. He's not the kind of guy who kills it on the power play. He's not, putting up 120 points. But he's a difference maker there. And then putting Sebastian Aho in the bumper has, changed things a little bit. And just overall, they kind of found a mix that works. And, I've talked to so many players. I remember talking to Stefan Nason and asking him, why do you and Jack Drury play so well together? And he's like, well, we've been playing together a long time because they played together in the AHL and then they played together in the NHL. I was like, yeah, but, not everybody who plays together for a long time plays well together. There's just Jeff Skinner was here forever with Eric Stahl and the two of them couldn't play together at all. I think they just found a mix that works. Brady Shay has actually done a really good job on the second unit, I think. Adding Evgeny Kuznetsov to that second unit gives it a different look. And then, Jake Gensel, I think, has the potential to really do damage there. And it didn't really disrupt the chemistry too much because you take Michael Bunting out of it, which is kind of really when things started to go well was when Michael Bunting moved into that unit. I wouldn't attribute it just to him in any way. But they didn't have to really tinker with things too much by taking Bunting out, sliding Gensel in. And I think we can agree Gensel's a superior offensive player to Michael Bunting, even though I think Michael Bunting's fine. There was a lot of that. They've tweaked things here and there. They started the series last series with Teuvo Teravainen in the top unit. After 2 games, they flipped him and Svechnikov, and they really had success with both units. So I'll be curious to see how I think special teams. I wrote for The Athletic today. I think special teams, maybe that gap has closed. In years past, the Hurricanes always had to seem to be fighting upstream because they played the Rangers and the Bruins and the Lightning. And it's like, just a murderer's row of really, really good power plays that have, and the Rangers are the same way. They've had so many years of having guys together that it starts to work. So if they can match the Rangers, I wouldn't say they're going to outplay the Rangers on the power play. It certainly could happen. But if it's a wash, I think that's a win for the Hurricanes, given how they play at 5-5.
I wanted to ask you about the head of the snake with Rod Brind'Amour, because I think this is seemingly weird timing. This story comes out of, Rod Brind'Amour and his contract and what happens then, followed by a whole lot of backpedaling for some reason about, everything's fine, all good. This contract is a non-issue. But it's still a weird time for this story to kind of pop its head out. What do you attribute that to? And is this a distraction of any sort?
Yeah, I think it's fine. I mean, it kind of went the same way last time too. It's a lot of pie. When Buffalo's job opened up, Matthew Fairburn wrote what I thought was a good piece about the candidates. And he listed Rod Brind'Amour just because of the connection to Kevin Adams, because they played together on the 06 team and more than that. But, they're Stanley Cup champions together. But he addressed it perfectly, which was, hey, this is the pie in the sky. It's not going to happen, 99.9%, but we at least have an obligation to tell you Rod Brind'Amour's contract's up. And I think that's the way people should have looked at this whole situation, because the guy loves it here. He loves, his family's here. His wife, his wife is from, the Triangle. His father-in-law is a legendary basketball coach here. He coached, he was an assistant at NC State, coached at UNC Asheville for a while. And then, he's got his youngest son, Brooks, plays junior Canes, actually plays right now with Brent Burns' son. Rod is so intertwined here in the community. I think, there's probably some agent posturing there, like, hey, we've got some downtime. If I bring this up now, it's not really a distraction. We could have a little moment where, a few insiders and a few local reporters say, Rod Brind'Amour played in Philadelphia. He's buddies with Ron Francis, which, yeah. I mean, I think it's a little bit of posturing just to kind of get things moving, and the timing's a little weird, but I think from what I understand, it's pretty close to done. And Rod makes it a priority that his staff gets taken care of too. It might get overstated a bit, but he's just a genuinely good guy, and he's worried about those guys too. He did have assistants and staff on his first go around whose contracts run out and asked for raises, and they go ahead and get a raise, go get it somewhere else, and left. So I think now he's got the team that he wants surrounding him, and he makes that a priority to when he gets taken care of, that those contracts line up with his, so that the same thing can happen for them.
You mentioned Rod, and one of the things I wrote down in my notes was just the gradual buildup, where they had the first year where he took over, they made the conference final. That was exciting. That was fun. But they have really kind of solidified themselves in that upper second tier, not with the main Stanley Cup contenders, but with the teams that consistently make the playoffs. They've won a playoff series every year, including the 1 year in the bubble. We'll count that for the purposes of this conversation. What is it about Rod that makes him both successful as a coach and is able to get buy-in? Because the Hurricanes have had a lot of roster turnover, frankly, and it feels like no matter who they bring in, he's able to get something out of them.
I mean, I don't want to say it starts with one thing or another, but I'll start with, first of all, the system he's playing, I think, is becoming the system that people want to play around the league. I remember asking him earlier in the year about when they were about to play Anaheim. I remember Greg Cronin saying, well, the Hurricanes are the kind of system we want to play. So I asked him, do the Ducks play what, it seems like they play pretty similar to you. And he was like, yep. So I think first of all, he's ahead of the curve on maybe being a little more aggressive with your defense, taking it to, making defensemen make plays, which is it's not easy to find good defensemen in the NHL unless you're the Hurricanes, I guess. I think that there's that.
We are forever grateful that Adam Fox's dad is a Rangers fan. Don't you forget about that. We will never forget that.
Right?
The service that he has done. Never
forget. For sure. I mean, just think of where they would be if Adam Fox was here too. And then you can never like talk to Rod Brind'Amour, be around Rod Brind'Amour, not kind of respect who he is. And all those guys know that Rod played the way he's asking them to play. He's not asking anybody to do anything that, he wouldn't do himself and didn't do himself as a player. And, he's the hardest working guy in the building still, whether that's, breaking down tape and preparing or it's in the weight room. I mean, the guy's still an animal in the weight room. So I think there's he has earned a lot of respect from his playing days. And then his genuine nature, the way he makes personal connections with players. And then, he tells the guy, like, every coach, you'll hear every coach say, oh, it's the playoffs, we've got to ramp it up. And Rod will never say that because he's like, no, there's one way to play hockey and it's playing at 100% all the time. And so no, there's no ramping up for the playoffs because we're supposed to be playing like that all the time. So I think that's the main thing.
I wanted to ask you, because Rangers fans today were in an uproar about this Athletic article that came out that listed the Hurricanes as a 66% chance to win. Rangers fans are upset. Their President's Trophy winning favorite team, only a 1/3% chance of winning the series. Everyone's got their pitchforks, and the fire is out. They are ready to strike whatever whoever they can, whenever they got the opportunity to do it. But in your view, these are two of some of the best teams in the league right now. Throughout the season, they've been playing really great for the most part. 66-34, whatever the number is. What do you personally think this series is? Maybe closer to 50-50? Is it really as one-sided as that article, or at least the numbers wanted to appear? Where do you think this series goes? And give your prediction. I mean, is this a Hurricanes in 5 kind of deal where that article is trying to say, or is it maybe a little bit more of a longer stretch?
I think it's a toss-up. I mean, I don't know why anybody would doubt what the Rangers are. I mean, I think they have their weaknesses. I'm not in love with the Rangers' defense.
You and us both, so that checks out.
I think that's something that the Hurricanes can expose if they're able to get to their 5-on-5 game. That being said, the Rangers did what they did this year with Mika Zibanejad not particularly playing well. And he's the kind of guy that I think is getting overlooked a little bit because of the season Panarin had and because of the stretch that Shesterkin has had and because of how good Adam Fox is. He, to me, is an X factor in this series. The two guys that I think are the big X factors are Mika and then Jake Gensel, who personally I don't think played well at all in the first series after pretty much lighting the world on fire after the deadline coming here. But looked a little bit lost in the first round. You look at the stats and you're like, oh, well, he's got enough points. But if you really go back and look at those plays, you're like, well, he had one good power play assist to Teuvo Teravainen. But beyond that, those points are kind of, maybe not anything that, jumps out at all to anyone. So I think those two guys are going to be a huge, huge part of this series. Obviously, goaltending is always a thing. We talked about special teams a bit. If the Rangers can figure out the Hurricanes penalty kill, which is good year after year, but teams have figured it out in the playoffs, that's a problem. And if the Hurricanes power play can play as well as it has played, then the Rangers have a problem on their hands too. So I'm excited for it. I can't wait. I think there's, some good subplots with the physicality that the Rangers bring. Obviously, Jacob Trouba has a history. Matt Rempe, who is, he's either going to become an NHLer or he's going to be the next Jeremy Lin or Tommy DeVito, right? So it'll be interesting to see if he can keep up in this series. I'm really interested to see how, I'm reminded of the Ryan Reeves comments from Gerard Gallant a couple years ago, where he was like, well, we've got the guy who can take care of things if, the Hurricanes are going to send messages at the end of games. And Rod Brind'Amour was basically like, yes, please play Ryan Reeves. And I wonder, Matt Rempe is, I don't think as slow as Ryan Reeves is, but you look at his own,
to be fair.
you look at his underlying numbers and they're not great. So that's something that if you can if your fourth line with Evgeny Kuznetsov on it can match up against, Matt Rempe, then that's a matchup the Hurricanes are going to take. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be fantastic. I don't get too caught up in it and ever this percentage chance to win, or even within games when those percentages move up in games and they're like, oh, they have an 82% chance to win because they're up 1-0. I'm just like, it's hockey. Like a puck could literally bounce off somebody's ass and go in, and it's a goal. So
building off of that, you had mentioned Gensel. Number one, why do you feel that this was the year that the Hurricanes pushed chips in and went out and got somebody big at the deadline? And then number two, off of that, you mentioned he wasn't great in the first round. How have they utilized him down the backstretch? Because I know they've had different permutations where he was playing with Jarvis and Aho. You had mentioned he was playing with Teravainen. So how do you feel he's been used, and why do you think this was the year the Hurricanes really pushed chips in?
Well, the Hurricanes have never been a buy a rental team. That being said, they made plays for players like Timo Meier. It's just they've never really been willing to say, yes, please take our top prospect and our first round pick. And they looked at their prospect pool, and their guy Ville Koivunen's a really good prospect, but is he even one of their top three prospects? Probably not. They're not going to trade. They weren't going to trade away Alexander Nikishin, who everybody in the NHL is going to know about in about 2 years because the kid is an absolute animal. But they're able to keep Bradley Nadeau and Jackson Blake, and so I think that was the big thing, was they were able to make a package of, I don't want to say B-level prospects, because I think guys like Vasily Ponomarev are NHL players, but a second tier of prospects. And then a conditional first round pick where if you make the Stanley Cup final and now you lose a first round pick, all right, we'll take that. So I think that was the big thing. As far as how he was utilized, that line with Aho and Jarvis looked pretty much unstoppable. It was not very good at the start of the series, so we saw that little flip with Svechnikov moving up and Jarvis going back to playing with Jordan Staal, and then Rob Brindamore made an interesting little move and put Teuvo Teravainen on the other wing there with those two. And it worked out pretty well because it adds a little offense to a Staal line that's usually a whole lot of like, hey, let's play 0-0 hockey for the 15 minutes I'm on the ice. I don't think that Jake was making a lot of mistakes. Game 5, I thought, maybe not his greatest game, but he fits the identity of the Hurricanes. He's going to get in hard on the forecheck. He plays bigger than he is. Sebastian Aho and Seth Jarvis are both guys that if you walked up to them on the street, you would be like, well, they're not particularly big. Sebastian Aho is listed at 6 feet, but I don't think so. But all three of those guys, I think, play bigger than they are. And then when you put Svechnikov on the opposite side of Gensel with Aho in the middle, now you've got a guy who is, one of the more physical forces in the NHL, and was probably, I think Svech was probably their best player in the first round. So at least among the forwards.
One of the players that you mentioned is Seth Jarvis, and I wanted to ask you about him because this dude's 21 years old. He's barely able to buy a beer, third year in the league, and he has been one of the best forwards on the Hurricanes this season, 33 goals, and also leading the team in points throughout the playoffs so far. He's elevated himself to a whole nother level. What have you seen out of him from comparatively to the first 2 seasons that he's played? Is he just attacking differently? Is his IQ when he's skating maybe better than what it was? Yeah, the counting stats are nice. He's on the power play now, which always helps the counting stats, sure, but on top of that, what have you seen out of him that has really emerged specifically this year comparatively to how he played before?
I did a story about this year for The Athletic, talking about how, he comes into the league as a, right out of junior kid and has a great year, scoring, a good amount of goals, the kind of stuff, like what Will Cooley has done. You get a new guy in the lineup, he scores some, you're like, all right, we've got something here. And then, last year, his numbers weren't so good. And the reason is because the comparison I made is you guys might be too young for this. But when Tiger Woods burst on the scene in the burst on the scene and then won the Masters going away, that next summer he went and he rebuilt his whole swing, like totally started from scratch, and then became arguably the most dominant player, ever, until injuries started to pile up. And that's what they did with Seth Jarvis. Was they broke down his game and said, Seth, the first thing you need to do is, if you want to play offense, you got to play defense first. And he bought in. So not only does he have the 33 goals and playing on the top power play unit and often on the top line, or at least in the top six, he's first over the boards with Jordan Staal to kill penalties. And I mean, has just blossomed into an all-around player. The type of, I know you guys know who he is, but I think if you get a chance, really watch him, and just what a smart, fun player he is to watch. I mean, I don't want to throw any kind of crazy comparisons out there, but he reminds me of Patrice Bergeron in the way that he is so good defensively. And then you turn around the other way and you're like, how did this guy just take care of stuff on his own end and then can do what he can do in the offensive end? And he's fearless. He's a hysterical guy. I mean, we'll have fun with him this series. He played against Matt Rempe Jr. He talked about it the other day. And he said, that was a tough team that Matt was on. He said there were maybe 3 guys there, and Matt maybe wasn't a fighter so much then as he is now, but he's still a tough guy. And I kind of said to him, you could maybe just skate between his legs. And he laughed. He was like, yeah, maybe I just scoot down a little bit. I can just go through. And he's a character too, just all around a really good kid. And the maturity of his defensive game, I think, is what has turned, every coach wants to, Scotty Bowman famously with Steve Yzerman, if you play defense, it'll lead to offense, and you don't need to score 140 points. If you score 100, but give up 20 less a season, that's better for us. And that's what Seth Jarvis has done, I think, is just really blossomed into a 200-foot all situations, top of the lineup guy.
He was awesome at the range. I think it was I forget if it was January or February, where the Carolina came to the Garden and they just pummeled the Rangers. I think the final score was 6-2 or 5-2, something like that. And he was just everywhere. And that generally feels like when the Canes are at their best, where they are just on the puck incessantly and there is no room to breathe. And you mentioned about the Rangers defense, that kind of being a cause for concern for them from a Rangers perspective. That to me seems like it's going to be the deciding factor, because when you go back and watch the series from 2022, Carolina had their way for the most part at 5-on-5. All of the key metrics, Carolina 56, 57%. For Carolina, they have been close more than once. They've been to a pair of conference finals. What in your estimation, has kind of been the separating factor for them versus the teams that have advanced past them?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it, and I don't want to say that it's the Hurricanes' power play that's going to win them series, but I really think the fact that the Hurricanes' power plays can maybe keep up now is such a big factor, and we talked about that a bit. So there's that. I think their goalie situation has always ended up weird year after year. Last year, it was actually went pretty well. Freddy Anderson didn't start right away, but he was great in that Panthers series. I mean, just lights out, and has been really good since coming back from a really scary, situation that's got him, as a finalist for the Masterton and maybe the favorite. So obviously they've had the goaltending stuff that's been a little weird, and but at the same time, it seems like whoever they throw in net for the most part ends up being good. So that's why I don't think you'll ever see the Hurricanes pay $10 million for a goalie, because they're just like, why would we pay $10 million for a goalie when we could make Peter Mrazek and Alex Nedeljkovic and Antti Ranta and Pyotr Kochetkov and Frederick Anderson, all, top of the league goaltenders for the most part. So I mean, I think the power play is going to be important as long as they can continue. 33% in the first round. If they can continue to at least be a 20% power play, if their penalty kill plays up to its capabilities, you're not going to stop the Rangers. I mean, there's too much. Chris Kreider's going to tip in, 2 goals this series, no matter what. But yeah, there's a lot of little things like that I think if they can at least play to their ability, you don't have to exceed it necessarily. And then if they can stay out of the penalty box, which they've done a good job of that in the first round, then I think, they got a puncher's chance. I think it's going to be, like I said, I think it's going to be an awesome series.
I wanted to ask you about Evgeny Kuznetsov because this is a guy that, by all accounts, the Hurricanes it was a surprise. No one expected, one, Kuznetsov to get traded, and two, for him to get traded to Carolina. That seemed like a strange 3 a.m. nightmare scenario of like, wait, what happened? Am I reading this right? What's going on? He didn't play well in Washington this year. The Capitals got better after he got traded, which I take what you will from that. He got to Carolina and seemingly has bounced back from that low point of his career earlier on. Take me through that process. And I understand, part of it's buying in with Brendan Moore and stuff like that, but it's still an arduous process for a guy that has been such a prolific scorer and offensive talent in Washington, and to being out of the lineup in the AHL. He got sent down. Nobody wanted him. Traded to Carolina, and now he's bouncing back in a big way. How does that happen?
Yeah, and to your point about the AHL, it's kind of funny. He was about to play Charlotte that night, so Tom Dundon just sent his plane from over to Charlotte from Raleigh and picked him up, and he showed up halfway through practice that day and jumped on the ice. Really, really good start when he first came on board. Slowed down as the regular season wound down. He plays at a different pace than the rest of the team. You mentioned how Nick, how the Hurricanes are always in your face, and that's not Evgeny Kuznetsov. But it seems like opponents are scared to attack him in the offensive zone. It's almost like they all see him like, it's like a movie where the guy can scan with a grid and scan out the whole situation, and opponents look at him and see him, in the offensive zone, and they're like, if I attack him, he's probably already thought 3 steps ahead about where this puck's going. So it's interesting. Stefan Nason said it's hard to play with him compared to some of the other guys because he thinks the game on just a whole different plane. He said, after the fact, I look at it and I'm like, of course, that's what you should do. But when Evgeny's doing it, it's totally a bizarre thing. So you'll have fun watching that because you're going to see, Jordan Martinook get on the forecheck and Jake Gensel and Seth Jarvis, and then Kuznetsov's going to come over the boards, and all of a sudden the whole game is going to feel like the comparison I gave was like if you've watched The Flash or if you've seen like Quicksilver in a Marvel movie, and when they show the slowdown, when they're running around, but then they zoom in on them and everyone else is moving slow. It's like Evgeny Kuznetsov takes the game and makes the whole game slower. And it's just really fascinating to watch. So I'll be curious to see how he does in this series, but on the same point, you can tell he has a playoff intensity. After game 1, when they did not play well against the Islanders, and he had a goal and an assist, first thing out of his mouth was, those first 2 periods were unacceptable. He's a guy who's, maybe has built a little bit of a reputation because some of the things that have happened to him. But he's an intense guy. And then at the same time, he's one of the funnier players I've ever been around. He is loose as can be in the locker room, and that can help you over the course of a long playoffs. When things get tense, it doesn't hurt to have a couple goofballs like Kuznetsov, and Seth Jarvis is a goofball too, and that Jordan Martinook. So I think it'll be interesting to see how he matches up again. Playing him on the 4th line, I mentioned that to him, and he said, well, it's different. It's different for me. I'm not used to that, but I just, I want to do what I can to help the team win. And all of a sudden, when Kuznetsov is out against the Rangers' 4th line, can that 4th line find a way to stop him? It's not like it's a big speed game when he's out there. It's going to be, don't make mental mistakes, because he can pick you apart. I mean, he's like a good quarterback in the pocket. Just sits there and just waits for you to show what you're going to do.
The flashes he had when Washington won that Stanley Cup, you really thought he might be the next guy up. He really had that type of potential. We had talked about Brady Shay earlier, and a lot of Ranger fans were still kind of in shock they got a 1st-round pick for him when they traded him, because they felt that was a straightforward salary dump from a Rangers perspective. Can you walk us through what his evolution has been? Because he's already been in Carolina almost 5 years now.
Yeah.
What has it been? Because he's
got gray hair, dude. Like, he's...
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, he's I feel like you shouldn't have gray hair, but that's that's maybe a whole different conversation about about Brady Shay in general.
There's somebody with gray hair in there with me.
It is a younger team.
He's 29. I'm 27. Is that what I'm going to look like in 2 years? I don't want that to happen. Now I'm nervous.
You should want to look like that in 2 years because that is a beautiful man.
That is an individual.
You're right. Good point.
I know that the Hurricane scouts drooled over all the skill set he had. He's a fantastic skater. His endurance is great. And then, you put him with Brett Pesce and you find a connection and you find those pairings. And I made the point last series that, the Islanders had that brief moment where Pelech and Pulock were like, oh my God, this is the next great pairing in the NHL. And then it fell off a cliff pretty quick. And the Islanders probably wish that pairing was like what Shea and Pesce are. But yeah, and then he started to figure out how to put the puck in the net. And he fits the system so well. Still has his lapses from time to time, I think. But when you put him with a guy like Brett Pesce, who won't start the series, he's going to be out to start. So it'll be him and Tony DeAngelo.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, sure you want to talk about Tony, right? Tony, Hot Mike Tony, as we call him, from last round. I think he just kind of matured as a player. They talk about defensemen getting, hitting that sweet spot in their late 20s maybe, and I think he has, and he's going to get absolutely buckets of money dropped on him. I mean, and he should. I mean, he's been so good. His ability to score from the top of the left circle, he shoots from there, and I just expect half the time it's going to go in because he's found a way to be really good from that area. And then, like I said, his skating is really good, and he's a big body too. It's not like this is a small guy, and and one of the better guys in the room. Just one of my favorite guys to talk to. Just a really, really good guy.
I wanted to ask you about Freddy Anderson. Now, the story is nothing short of spectacular. The coming back and through everything that he's been through, and also playing the way he did when he came back, he was on fire, to say the least. He went on an absolute tear. I think he went like 13-2, something like that. He was insane. In this series against the Islanders, he was okay. He wasn't bad by any means, but he wasn't the best player in the series, and he hasn't been the best goalie in the playoffs so far. He didn't have to be. Is that something that could be cause for concern, because this is a team like the Rangers that could score almost at will? They have so many offensive behemoths that could at any point decide, hey, you know what would be really cool if I scored a goal, and they could just go and do it. Freddy Anderson didn't have the best series. Is that a concern in the back of your mind that, okay, well, the Rangers could exploit that against Freddy Anderson?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a concern. I think, I don't expect him to flame out in this series. And if he were to, that might be the worst thing that could happen for the Rangers, because Pyotr Kochetkov loves playing against Russian goalies. So for whatever reason, whenever he plays against a Russian goalie, he is lights out. But yeah, I don't worry too much about Freddie. He's such a, I thought Curtis McElhenney, when he was here, was a guy who showed no emotion. And then Freddie showed up and I was like, wow, Freddie is as even a player in person as you could possibly meet. So he doesn't get rattled by one goal or two goals. So, to the point of him, falling, a lot of goalies would have fallen apart after he fell down to give up that tying goal in Game 5. And he didn't have to do a ton in the third period there, but he did have to make some saves. And I'm not worried that, I think the concern for Carolina would be is your goalie gets vastly outplayed, and it's not because Freddie plays bad, but it's because Igor plays like the best goalie in the world, which, he's right there in that conversation, especially after Connor Hellebuck, went up in a ball of flames in the Jets series. So, so I mean, I wouldn't say I would be concerned if I was Carolina about Freddie's performance. I would more be concerned about, are we going to get equal goaltending, not because our guy doesn't play well, but because the other guy plays insane.
By the way, how scary is it that the Winnipeg Jets were one of the best defensive teams in the entire league all season. Connor Hellebuyck is surely going to win the Vezina. And then Colorado came in and said, we don't care about any of that. We're going to make all of you look pedestrian as hell. And they dismantled them in 5 games. That is, I'm so glad I'm not a fan of a Western Conference team. That is a terrifying team to face. As an aside, that is so brutally terrifying.
I don't know. I did make a joke the other day about, can you imagine a Colorado-Carolina final with Tony D'Angelo in the lineup against Georgiev? Could make for a fun thing. But yeah, I think that's their concern, is that their goaltending hasn't been great this year either. So for the way everybody talks about Carolina's goaltending, it's been actually really good since that start of the year, where it was kind of a chicken and egg of what's the problem here? Is it that the defense is bad so that the goaltenders aren't playing well and then therefore losing confidence, and back and forth. But I don't think they worry about it too much. But Colorado's, I do worry a little bit about their situation in net, especially with Anunin not being available too.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple of guys. You mentioned the idea that the Hurricanes build their defense out, and no matter who they bring, it seems to work. They have a lot of roster decisions they have to make this upcoming summer. They have key RFAs in Drury and Nyquist. They have the UFAs in Shea and Pesce. Does it feel like this might be, I don't want to say it for this permutation of the Hurricanes, but this kind of feels like a sliding doors moment where if it doesn't go through this time, they're going to have to recalibrate the team?
Yeah, I don't like to use the term that a window is closing, because I think there's so many good young players. And you mentioned, Nyquist and Drury, and Jarvis is doing a new deal too, which, again, I'm sure if the Hurricanes could, they would love to lock him up for 8 years. But we'll see what that number is. He's made himself a lot of money the second half of the season. But yeah, I think while I don't think it's a window closing moment, it is going to be a vastly different team next year. Brady Shay and Brett Pesce are both free agents. Jalen Chatfield, who a lot of people don't know a lot about, is a free agent. And I know they would love to keep him, especially the way he's played with Dmitry Orlov this year. Just that pairing has been so good, especially when you can put him out there as your third pairing. It's kind of insane. But he's a really good player. The RFAs you mentioned, Tara Vinan's a free agent. There's a lot, Jake Gensel obviously is a free agent. So there's a lot of guys that they have to think about. So yes, for sure, it's a kind of a last dance with this group, I would say. But at the same time, after the dust clears and whoever stays and whoever goes, I think the Hurricanes have done such a good job with their salary cap, with their prospect pool, with all those kind of things, that they should be able to, and they're so clever with the way they make trades and stuff and maneuver their roster around, that I think, I think they'll be okay after this year. But, if you're Jordan Martinook and Brett Pesce and Brady Shea, and you've been playing together these last 6 years, those guys are all, Tara Vinan's been here that whole time, all those guys have been together this whole run. And I'm sure there's a feeling of this is our last chance to do it together.
One last question from us and we'll let you go, Cory. So, let's say we're psychopaths about the New York Rangers. We watch every game. We watch, we dig into the tape and the underlying stats and all these things. The Rangers have a franchise record in wins this season, and yet we still are worried about some of the pitfalls from this team. We talked about Zibanejad earlier on. He had a great series against Washington, but he went 30 games without a 5-on-5 goal in the regular season. We've seen that, we make jokes about Jacob Trouba, our $8 million a year captain who plays on the third pairing for some reason because he can't really defend that well. We see the pitfalls. We see the issues with this team. Do the Hurricanes see the same issues that we do? Because the Rangers have so much talent up front, on the back end. Obviously, Shesterkin, one of the best goalies on the planet, but we have to be objective and think of ways that other teams can beat the Rangers, and that's, if you shut down those top two pairs at 5-on-5 and you exploit Jacob Trouba on the defensive end, then you're cooking. Do the Hurricanes see it the same way? Are the Hurricanes because like the Rangers are viewed as the best team in the league, all these points and all that, and they are viewed as one of the best teams. But do the Hurricanes see the same issues that perhaps we do?
I'm sure that they're, looking. I mean, we saw it 2 years ago, right? I mean, with the way that series went with the home team winning, Rod Brind'Amour is going to do everything he can to get the guys out against, Panarin that he wants out there. He's going to want Jordan Staal out there. He's probably going to want, Jacob Slavin. If he gets Brett Pesce back, which they're hoping he'll come back at some point in the series, usually it's Shea and Pesce who are draw the shutdown. Everyone talks about Jacob Slavin. It's such a luxury to have one guy who can play with Brent Burns and shut things down. And, you talked about $8 million defenseman. I mean, Dmitry Orlov makes 7.75 and he's on the third pair. So, I think for sure they're going to try to exploit matchups. I think both teams will. And obviously the Rangers are going to have the edge on that in the first two games, having the last change. So, I'm really curious to see how that matches up. Rod Brind'Amour has slowly started to shift from Jordan Staal gets the top line no matter who they're playing to when they play Colorado, Aho goes head to head with Nathan McKinnon. I mean, the speed factor is a thing there. Jordan Stahl's a big man. He's also, in his mid 30s and he's slowing down a little bit. He's still a total handful to deal with. But at the same time, Sebastian Aho has taken on more of that load. And with the talent that the Rangers have up front, it's not like you can put Jordan Staal out against two top six lines, right? You're going to have to get good contributions out of the Aho line defensively as well as offensively. And then, like I said, I think they will really try to exploit maybe better depth in the bottom six. And that could change, Phil Keto, I don't know where he stands at this point, but that's an X factor for them, just like Pesce's an X factor in this series too. If guys come back from injuries, having Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who didn't have a point in the first round, but he hit the knob of the stick in overtime in game 4, hit the post in game 5. That's a lot of talent on a fourth line that, maybe people laugh and say, oh, you gave an offer sheet to a guy who plays on your fourth line. But at the same time, you can say, wow, here's a top, 3 talent who, plays way down the lineup because of just how deep this team is. So I think they're going to try to use their depth. I think that's the best thing they can do. They're not going to match Panarin as far as skill. He's the most talented player in this series, I think, offensively. So they're going to have to slow him down. He's going to have to prove that he's as good of an offensive player in the postseason as he is in the playoffs. And I know he had a few points in the first round, a couple on the power play. I think a goal at even strength. But he's going to have a big series. Vincent Trocheck had a tough run here in the playoffs. We'll see how he plays. He's a handful. We're very, very familiar with Vinny. So I'm curious to see whose skin he tries to get under. I'm sure he and Martin Necas are going to get under each other's. Vincent's going to try to get under him and try to shake Martin Necas out of this series. So.
You can read his stuff over at North State Journal and also The Athletic at Cory Lav on Twitter. I'm not calling it X. I refuse. Cory, you're the absolute best. Really appreciate all your time today. Game 1 is Sunday, 4 p.m. It's going to be a blast.
And I think game 2 has to be Tuesday. That's what we have with the Knicks, and although the NHL refuses to announce it. But guys, and if you want to talk later in the series, I'm happy to, and maybe even see you up in New York and have a good time with this one. I think it's going to be awesome. And I think that's all we can root for is good hockey. So that's what I'm hoping for.
It's like Rob Lowe with that NFL logo hat. It's like, oh, just good hockey, please, as we have Rangers apparel behind us. Cory, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.